They called the dog Kaiser, a dangerous failure slated for destruction, too aggressive for any man to control. They called the man Wraith, a haunted Navy SEAL, a man trapped in silence by his own nightmares. This is the story of how two discarded souls who couldn't speak the same language saw the same pain in each other's eyes and pulled one another back from the brink. The sky over Coronado, California, was the color of pale, washed-out denim. A cool, persistent marine layer rolled in off the Pacific, slicking the asphalt of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado and turning the K-9 training field into a dark, muddy expanse. It was the kind of damp chill that seeped into your bones, a coastal cold that no uniform could entirely ward off. At the far end of the field, Master Sergeant Cole shouted a command. Cole was a man built like a fire hydrant, short, solid, and perpetually flushed from a combination of the cold and his own simmering frustration. He was an old-school K-9 trainer, a believer in dominance and repetition, and he held a padded training baton as if it were an extension of his will. His frustration was aimed at a single animal, a magnificent 2-year-old German Shepherd named Kaiser. The dog was a portrait of canine power with a sable coat of black and deep tan and intelligent, alert ears. But right now, those ears were pinned back, and the whites of his eyes were visible as he danced nervously at the end of his leash. Another handler, clad in a padded bite suit, jogged onto the field, playing the part of the decoy. "Engage him!" Cole roared. The handler released the leash, but Kaiser didn't charge the decoy. Instead, he took 2 steps, skidded in the mud, and then whirled back, barking furiously. His target wasn't the man in the bite suit, but Master Sergeant Cole. He launched himself into the air, a desperate, defensive sound tearing from his throat. Cole took an involuntary step back, his face darkening. "No, you worthless dog. Engage the target." The decoy slapped his padded arm, trying to draw the dog's attention, but Kaiser ignored him completely. His entire focus was on Cole and the baton in Cole's hand. He wasn't attacking. He was defending. He was terrified. "That's enough," Cole bellowed, waving the decoy to stand down. "Test failed. Get him out of here." He stormed over to a kennel tech, a young sailor who looked unnerved by the fury. "I'm filing the report. This dog is a washout. He's unstable. A liability to his handler. He's done." The kennel tech nodded, moving cautiously to take the still agitated dog. "What does that mean, Master Sergeant?" "It means he's done," Cole repeated, spitting the words. "He's getting the needle. I'm recommending he be put down. He's useless." From the cold, empty metal bleachers set back from the field, Jake Wraith Riley had watched the entire exchange without moving. Jake was a man who seemed sculpted from shadows. He was tall, lean, with a stillness that most people found unsettling. His face was sharp, angular, and his deep-set gray eyes seemed to absorb the gray light without reflecting any of it. He was a Navy SEAL, and his call sign, Wraith, was well earned. But he wasn't deployed. He was here, sidelined, thanks to 2 metal pins and a rod in his left leg. He shifted, the dull ache in his femur flaring in the damp air. This base, this forced recovery, felt like a cage. He was a creature of movement, of purpose, and now his purpose had been reduced to physical therapy and mandatory weekly sessions with Dr. Evans. He thought of her now, Dr. Evans, the civilian psychologist assigned to him. She was a kind, patient woman with intelligent eyes that always seemed to see a little too much. He resented the process, resented the implication that he was broken in more ways than one. Jake watched the kennel tech struggle with Kaiser. The dog was panicking, yanking on the leash, trying to get away from Cole, who was still shouting, gesticulating with the baton. Jake had seen what Cole, in his rage, refused to. He saw the dog's eyes constantly flicking away, not to Cole's face, but to the baton. He saw the dog wasn't lunging to kill. It was lunging to create space. He saw an intelligent animal being cornered by a bully. In that moment, Jake felt a sharp, unwelcome pang of empathy. He felt caged, too. He felt as if the world was poking him with a stick, trying to get a reaction. As the tech began to half-drag, half-haul the terrified dog toward a waiting vehicle, Jake stood. The movement, sudden and silent, drew every eye on the field. Even Cole paused mid-rant. Commander Wallace, the base commander, was standing near the gate, observing the tests. Wallace was a career officer, a man whose immaculate uniform seemed to repel the mist and mud by sheer force of will. His face was stern, etched with the permanent burden of command. He watched Jake approach, noting the slight, precise limp in the SEAL's stride. Jake stopped a respectful 5 feet from his commanding officer. He didn't look at Cole. He spoke only to Wallace. "Sir, I'll take responsibility for the dog." The mist dripped from the brim of Wallace's cap. Cole let out a sharp, incredulous snort. Riley, you can barely run the track. What the hell are you going to do with a psychotic K9? It needs to be put down. It's a liability. Wallace held up a single finger, silencing Cole instantly. Master Sergeant. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He turned his full attention to Jake. This isn't a stray puppy, Riley. This is a failed military asset, a $20,000 piece of equipment that is now, as the Master Sergeant correctly noted, a liability. Jake met the commander's gaze. His voice was low, even, a monotone that cut through the sound of the mist. The dog isn't broken, sir. He flicked his eyes for a fraction of a second toward Cole, toward the baton. He just doesn't trust him. Let me try. There was a long silence. Wallace studied the man before him. He saw his best operator, sidelined by injury, a man adrift, a man who had been described by Dr. Evans as dangerously detached. And now, for the first time in weeks, Wallace saw a spark of something in those gray eyes. It wasn't anger, it was purpose. Wallace made his decision. All right, Riley, he said, his voice final. Consider it a part of your rehabilitation, a project, but I am holding you 100% accountable. He is your personal responsibility. He stays with you. Any incident, any complaint, just one, and the original order stands. The dog will be put down. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Jake said. Then he's all yours. Jake nodded once, a short, sharp gesture. He turned and walked past Cole, who looked like he'd swallowed acid. Jake walked directly to the young kennel tech, who was clutching the leash in a white-knuckled grip. Jake simply held out his hand. The tech gratefully and quickly handed over the leash. The moment the leather was in Jake's palm, Kaiser stopped pulling. The dog stood still, panting, and looked up at this new, quiet man. He tilted his head, his ears twitching. Jake said nothing. He just turned and began the long walk back to his quarters, his limp steady and rhythmic on the wet pavement, and at his side, not pulling, not resisting, Kaiser followed. The walk from the K9 training field to the Wounded Warrior Barracks was a silent one, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of Jake's boots and the soft patting of Kaiser's paws on the wet pavement. The marine layer had settled into a persistent mist that cloaked the base in a film of gray. Jake held the leash loosely. Kaiser, to his surprise, didn't pull. The dog walked beside him, head low, his whole body tense and vibrating with suspicion, but he didn't fight. It was as if leaving the presence of Master Sergeant Cole had drained the immediate panic, replacing it with a deep, watchful uncertainty. They passed a few sailors jogging in formation, their unified cadence a stark contrast to Jake's solitary limp. No one spoke to Jake. He was a presence on the base, but not truly a part of it. He was a SEAL, and even on a base full of sailors, the SEALs were a different, separate breed. And Wraith was more separate than most. His room was on the ground floor of a newer barracks block, a small concession granted due to his recovery status, sparing him the stairs. He swiped his key card, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped inside, leaving the door open for the dog. Kaiser balked at the threshold. He braced his front paws, lowering his head to sniff the metal doorframe, his body rigid. Jake didn't turn, command, or pull. He simply walked to the middle of the room and began unlacing his damp boots. He was giving the dog a choice: stay out in the mist, or step into the unknown. After a full minute, Kaiser cautiously took one low step onto the floor inside. He moved like a shadow, his claws clicking softly on the polished linoleum. Jake's room was a reflection of his mind, austere, orderly, and stripped of anything non-essential. It smelled of gun oil, clean laundry, and the faint, bitter aroma of black coffee. A single cot was made with military precision, the green wool blanket so tight you could bounce a quarter off it. A simple wooden desk held a reading lamp and a single, worn paperback book. Against the far wall was a tall metal locker. There was no television, no pictures, no clutter. Kaiser scanned the space, his eyes wide, ears swiveling to catch every sound. He saw the bed, the desk, and the man. He backed away from all three, moving until his hindquarters bumped against the wall. He found the most defensible spot available, the 90-degree corner between the metal locker and the desk. He wedged himself into the tight space, turned a circle, and lay down, his nose pointed toward Jake. And then it started. A low, vibratory growl deep in his chest. It wasn't the panic barking from the field. This was a clear, steady, unmistakable warning. It was the sound of a perimeter being established. It said, "This is my space. Do not cross the line." Jake stood, walked to his locker, and opened it. He pulled out 2 standard-issue metal bowls. He walked past the corner where Kaiser lay, ignoring the dog and the growl, which intensified as he passed. He went into the small, adjoined bathroom, filled 1 bowl with water, and set it down in the open area near the middle of the floor. He'd acquired a bag of high-protein dry food from the K9 unit, and he poured a measure into the second bowl, placing it beside the water. This was neutral ground. He was providing sustenance, but he wasn't going to force it. Then Jake turned his back on the dog. It was a conscious act of trust, a signal that he was not a threat. He sat at his desk, his back to the growling corner. He picked up his book. It was an old copy of Moby Dick, its spine broken and its pages soft with wear. He opened it to his bookmark and began to read. The room fell into a new kind of silence. There was the whisper of the mist against the window, the faint hum of the building's ventilation, the occasional soft rustle of a turning page, and the unending, resonant growl from the corner. An hour passed. The light outside began to fade, turning the room a deeper shade of gray. Jake's leg began to throb, a deep, dull ache that pulsed with the weather. The cold and damp always made it worse. He finished his chapter, placed the book face down on the desk, and rubbed his thigh, his jaw tightening for a moment. He opened a desk drawer, took out a small white bottle of pills, and dry swallowed 2 of them. From the corner, the growl stopped. Kaiser's head lifted slightly. He'd seen the movement, he'd seen the small sign of pain. He watched Jake for a long moment, his dark, intelligent eyes analyzing. Then, the growl started up again, but perhaps with a fraction less intensity. Jake returned to his book. He read for another hour before closing it for the evening. He stood, stretched, and began his evening routine. He disassembled his sidearm on a small mat, cleaning each component with precise, economical movements. He didn't need to. It was already clean. It was a ritual. It was order. All the while, Kaiser watched. He watched this strange, quiet man who moved with purpose, who ignored him, who didn't shout, who didn't raise his hand, and who seemed to be in some kind of pain of his own. Finally, Jake prepared for sleep. He switched off the main light, leaving just the small desk lamp on, which cast the room in a soft, yellow glow. He didn't get under the covers. Instead, he lay on top of the cot, still in his t-shirt and pants, his boots off. He folded his arms over his chest and stared at the ceiling. He was waiting. He slowed his breathing, letting it fall into the even rhythm of sleep, though he was wide awake. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The growl, which had become background noise, suddenly stopped. The silence that replaced it was heavy, filled with tension. Jake didn't move. He didn't breathe any differently. He just listened. He heard a deep breath, an intake of air as Kaiser tasted the room. Then a new sound, the click, click, click of claws on the linoleum floor. It was moving. Jake fought the urge to turn his head. He watched the ceiling. In his peripheral vision, he saw a dark shape emerge from the corner. Kaiser moved slowly, his body still low, a ghost in the dim light. He came to the middle of the room. He stopped at the water bowl, sniffed it, his head coming up to look at the motionless man on the bed, then back to the bowl. A soft lapping sound echoed in the room. He drank deeply for a long time. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. After drinking, Kaiser paused. He looked at the dry food. He looked at Jake. He was still suspicious. He nudged the food bowl with his nose, making it rattle on the floor. Jake remained motionless. Finally, Kaiser lowered his head. The crunch and crackle of the dry kibble breaking between his jaws was loud in the small room. He didn't eat aggressively. He ate methodically, his hunger finally winning out over his fear. He finished the bowl, lapped some more water, and then instead of retreating to his defensive corner, he simply lay down by the door, about 10 feet from Jake's bed. He let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a soldier at the end of a very long day. He put his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on Jake. He wasn't growling. He was just watching. Jake allowed his own eyes to close. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't even a beginning, but it was a truce. And for now, a truce was enough. The first hours of the night were still, the truce held. Kaiser slept by the door, a dark, breathing shape, his body finally relaxed enough for real sleep. On the cot, Jake lay motionless, but his mind was not at rest. Sleep for him was no longer a refuge. It was an ordeal. It was a dark tunnel he had to navigate, hoping not to touch the electrified walls of his own memory. Tonight, he was not so lucky. The cool barracks room, the moon casting striped shadows through the window blinds. But in Jake's mind, the air was scorching hot and filled with dust. The smell of diesel fuel and superheated sand filled his nostrils. He was moving, running. The heavy thud of his boots was drowned out by the roar of a helicopter overhead. The pain in his leg was gone, replaced by the familiar, purposeful adrenaline of a mission. He was back in that narrow alley of stone and sun-baked earth. On the bed, Jake's breathing began to change. It hitched, then quickened, becoming shallow and rapid. A low sound, a single word, escaped his lips. Check. Check. Corner. By the door, Kaiser's head came up, his ears swiveling, pinpointing the sound. He rose from the floor in one fluid motion, his body instantly alert. This was not the man who read books and took pills. This was something new. A low, uncertain growl rumbled in his chest, a question to the darkness. He saw the shape on the bed, but the sounds coming from it were wrong. They were the sounds of distress. Jake's dream accelerated. He saw his teammate, a young operator named Bishop, give him a thumbs up before disappearing around a corner. Then the world went white. The sound wasn't an explosion. It was a physical blow, a wave of pressure that threw Jake backward, stealing the air from his lungs. The white flash was followed by absolute silence. In the room, Jake's body went rigid, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Bishop, he whispered, his voice choked with panic. Kaiser took a few steps forward, his claws clicking on the floor. He whined softly, his head tilted. He was deeply conflicted. All his life, a human struggling, in pain, meant danger. It meant a blow was coming. He should retreat to his corner. He should bare his teeth. But this was the man who had shared his space, the man whose quiet presence had been a shield. The curiosity he felt was stronger than the fear. He paced near the foot of the bed, a nervous energy building in him. The nightmare reached its climax. Jake, in his mind, was crawling through rubble. The ringing in his ears had faded, replaced by a high, terrible scream. He saw Bishop, or what was left of him. He saw the blood. He saw the booby trap. He tried to stand, to pull his teammate to safety, and that's when he looked down and saw his own leg twisted at an impossible angle, the white of bone stark against the dust and blood. The pain wasn't a memory. It was real. It was white-hot and absolute. The scream he heard was his own. No. Jake roared, the sound exploding from his lungs. He wasn't whispering anymore. He was shouting, his eyes clamped shut. He thrashed violently, his body twisting, his arms flailing as if to ward off an unseen enemy. His right arm slammed against the wall beside the bed with a heavy, dull thud. Get back. It's a trap. The sudden violence and the raw scream shattered the dog's hesitation. This was the moment of decision. Every instinct that Cole had tried to beat into him screamed attack. Every fearful impulse he'd ever known screamed run. Kaiser did neither. He lunged forward and in one powerful leap, he was on the bed. The mattress bounced. A sudden, shocking change in Jake's environment. Jake, his mind still 90% in the desert, felt the weight land near his legs. He reacted instantly, the way he was trained. He brought his good leg up and kicked, while his hand, the one that had hit the wall, came back as a defensive strike. Down. Get off me. He yelled, his voice panicked, his forearm colliding hard with the dog's shoulder. The blow would have sent a smaller animal flying. Kaiser just absorbed it, his heavy muscles bracing against the impact. He didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He stepped forward over Jake's flailing legs, planting his two heavy front paws squarely on Jake's chest. He pinned him. The immediate weight, a heavy, grounding pressure, stopped Jake from thrashing. Jake's eyes flew open, but they were vacant and unseeing, still trapped in the nightmare. He was gasping, taking short, ragged breaths. Off, he choked out. Kaiser lowered his head until his face was inches from Jake's. He pressed his cold, wet nose hard against Jake's jaw, and he whined. It wasn't the sound of fear or aggression. It was a high, insistent, questioning sound. Are you in there? I'm here. Wake up. The sensations were a sudden cold shock through the phantom heat of the desert. The weight on his chest was heavy and real. The smell of dog fur and clean air, not dust and cordite. The cold, wet pressure on his skin, and that insistent sound, a whine demanding his attention. Jake's vision snapped into focus. He wasn't in the alley. He was in his room. The gray light of the moon was filtering through the blinds, his t-shirt was soaked with sweat, and his heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he could feel it pushing back against the dog's paws. And a German shepherd was standing on his chest, staring directly into his eyes. Kaiser, he gasped. The word was a choked breath. His adrenaline was still screaming, his whole body was shaking. Down. Kaiser didn't move. He just stared, his dark, intelligent eyes locked on Jake's. He whined again, softer this time. Jake's right hand was still raised, clenched into a fist, ready to strike again. He looked at it as if it belonged to someone else. It was trembling. Slowly, painfully, he uncurled his fingers. He stared at his palm, then back up at the dog. The animal had taken a blow, had been screamed at by a man in a frenzy, and had not backed down. It had moved in. Jake let out a long, shuddering breath. The adrenaline shakes were replaced by a different kind of tremor. It was the earthquake of his defenses, finally, terrifyingly, cracking. His raised hand moved. He didn't push the dog away. He slowly lifted it and threaded his fingers into Kaiser's thick, coarse fur. He gripped it not to hurt, but to hold on, to anchor himself. The fur was real. The animal was warm. "Okay," Jake whispered. "Okay." A sound tore from his chest, a choked, ragged gasp that was half a sob. He pulled the dog closer. He didn't just hug him. He buried his face in the thick fur of Kaiser's neck, shutting out the room, shutting out the memories. He clung to the dog like a drowning man to a piece of wreckage. Kaiser stood firm, absorbing the tremors that ran through the man. He let Jake hold him, his body a solid, warm presence in the cold, dark room. And then, tentatively, he turned his head and licked Jake's ear, once. The morning after the nightmare, the barracks room felt different. The air, usually taut with suspicion, had settled into stillness. Jake woke up on his cot, his muscles stiff, his head aching with emotional residue. His first, immediate act was to look for the dog. Kaiser wasn't by the door. He was lying on the small rug near the foot of Jake's bed, head on his paws, watching him. There was no growl. When Jake's eyes met his, the dog's tail gave a single, almost imperceptible thump against the floor. The memory of the previous night flooded back to Jake, the terror, the weight on his chest, and the solid, warm presence he had clung to. He felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of shame. He, a Navy SEAL, had been reduced to a quivering mess, and this animal had been his only anchor. He sat up, swinging his legs off the cot. His injured leg protested, sending a familiar, sharp pain up his thigh. Kaiser stood, not in alarm, but simply in observation. He did a long, fluid stretch, then sat, watching as Jake went through his morning routine. The dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The perimeter was gone. Jake's schedule for the day was immutable: physical therapy at 0900, followed by his mandatory session with Dr. Evans at 1100. He pulled on his boots, his movement stiff. He looked at the dog. He had no crate. He had no way to contain him. "I'll be back," he said, his voice hoarse from sleep. He picked up his key card, opened the door, and stepped out, leaving Kaiser untethered in the room. He didn't know if the dog would tear the room apart or try to escape. He just knew he had to trust him. 2 hours later, he stood outside Dr. Evans's office door. It was in a quiet, civilian section of the base, a small building that tried its best not to look like it was on a military installation. He knocked. "Come in, Jake. It's open." He stepped inside. Drive. Evans's office was the polar opposite of his barracks room. It was warm, carpeted, and filled with lush green plants. 2 comfortable armchairs faced each other, and the air smelled faintly of herbal tea. Dr. Evans was a woman in her 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was a civilian, a buffer between the rigid military world and the complex inner lives of the soldiers. She smiled warmly. "Have a seat." Jake sat, as he always did, on the edge of the chair, his posture rigid. "How's the leg this week?" she began. "It's fine," he replied. "And the sleep?" "Fine." She made a small note in her pad. "You seem different today, Jake. Less tense." He said nothing. He just stared at a plant by the window. She leaned forward slightly. "Commander Wallace mentioned he'd assigned you a project. A dog from the K9 unit." Jake's posture changed, a small, subtle shift. His shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. "Yeah. How is that going?" she asked, her voice gentle, inquisitive. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He should have said fine. He should have deflected and waited out the clock. But the image of Kaiser standing on his chest, pulling him out of the fire, was too present. "He's not what they said," he said, the words coming out low and uneven. Dr. Evans just waited, her pen still. "They said he was aggressive, a washout, unstable." Jake looked from the plant to her face. "They were wrong. He's not aggressive. He's scared. Cole, the trainer, he used an attack stick. The dog wasn't attacking. He was defending himself. He was just trying to make the man stop. It was the most he'd said in one stretch since his sessions began. Dr. Evans's expression didn't change, but her eyes were sharp with understanding. So, you saw something they missed. Or something they didn't want to see. Jake nodded once. He just needed space. For someone not to poke him with a stick, she offered, gently. Jake looked down at his hands. Yeah. It sounds like you're doing very well with him, Jake. It sounds like he just needed someone to see past the label. She paused, then tilted her head. You know, Jake, an animal like that, a working breed, a German Shepherd, they're incredibly intelligent, but they're not like us. They don't understand rehabilitation. They don't understand being sidelined. When they're benched, they get restless. They get confused. And that confusion can look like aggression. She leaned forward, her gaze intent. That dog doesn't need a master to dominate him. He needs a job. He needs a purpose. He's a specialist, just like you. And right now, you're both stuck in a world that doesn't make sense, waiting for orders. The word purpose echoed in the quiet room. It hit Jake with the force of a physical blow. He thought of his own days drifting between physical therapy and this office, a weapon with no war, a tool with no mission. He looked at Dr. Evans, and for the first time, he felt like she wasn't just analyzing him. She understood. The rest of the session passed quietly. When he left, the word purpose was a new compass point in his mind. He walked back to his room. He swiped his card, his hand hesitating on the door handle, bracing himself for a scene of destruction. He pushed the door open. The room was exactly as he'd left it. The cot was untouched. The desk was neat. Kaiser was lying by the door, and as Jake stepped in, his tail thumped against the floor, a genuine, friendly greeting. That evening, the pain in Jake's leg was intense. The hours of PT and the emotional drain of the session had left him exhausted. He sat at his desk, trying to go through a stack of after-action reports he'd been tasked with reviewing. Mind-numbing desk work. He shifted in his hard chair, trying to find a position that didn't send a bolt of pain up his thigh. He reached for his pen, fumbling. It slipped from his grasp, hit the edge of the desk, and skittered across the floor, disappearing into the shadows under the cot. Jake closed his eyes and dropped his head into his hands for a moment. The frustration was bitter. Bending down, getting on his knees, and reaching into the dark space under the bed was a 5-minute operation, a maneuver of awkward angles and certain pain. He let out a long, slow breath and gripped the arms of the chair, preparing to stand. He didn't get the chance. Kaiser, who had been watching him from the rug, got to his feet. He walked, not with any nervous energy, but with a calm, quiet deliberation. He went to the side of the cot, lowered his head, and sniffed along the edge. He disappeared under the bed for a moment. There was a soft clink as his teeth closed on plastic. He backed out, his tail held in a neutral, level position. In his mouth, he held the pen. Jake sat motionless, watching. Kaiser walked to Jake's chair. He looked up at the man, and then delicately, gently, dropped the pen on the desk right next to Jake's hand. It was wet, but it was there. Jake stared at the pen. He looked at Kaiser. The dog simply looked back at him, his dark eyes clear and steady. Then, as if the task was complete, Kaiser let out a soft huff of air, and lay down at Jake's feet, his chin resting on one of the man's chosen boots. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't obedience. It was a voluntary act of partnership. The night of the pen retrieval marked a turning point. Jake slept, truly slept, for the first time in months. When he awoke, it wasn't to the echo of gunfire, but to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the dog at the foot of his bed. Kaiser was there, a solid, real presence that had anchored him through the darkness. As Jake went through his morning rituals, the word purpose that Dr. Evans had spoken to him echoed in his mind. He looked at Kaiser, who watched his every move with sharp, analytical eyes. This was not a dumb beast. This was a bored genius. It was a high-performance engine that Master Sergeant Cole had tried to run on contaminated fuel. Cole wanted a weapon, a guided missile that responded to rage. But Kaiser was a scalpel designed for precision. Jake made a decision. He was done treating the dog like a patient. It was time to treat him like a professional. He went to the K9 supply warehouse, a place he'd avoided. He used his credentials to sign out a long training lead and a few other supplies. In a forgotten bin in the back, he found a dust-covered object. A heavy, dark red rubber ball, scarred and pitted from the teeth of previous recruits. It was nothing special, but it was solid. He pocketed it. He returned to the room. Kaiser tilted his head, sniffing the air, curious about the new equipment. Jake knelt, not in supplication, but to be on the dog's level. He held out the ball. "This," he said quietly, "is the job." Kaiser's eyes locked onto the object. His entire body vibrated. "This," he understood. "This is the prey. This is the reward." "But you have to earn it," Jake said. He started that afternoon. He took Kaiser not to the manicured K9 field, but to a remote, overgrown obstacle course behind the main barracks, a place rarely used. In the distance, they could hear the faint, sharp shouts of Master Sergeant Cole working another dog on the main field. "Engage. Hit it. No. Bad." The sounds were angry and brittle on the cool air. Jake ignored them. He took out the scarred old ball. He showed it to Kaiser, whose eyes were glued to it. "Watch me," Jake said. He tossed the ball lightly, only a few feet away. Kaiser lunged, but Jake let out a low, sharp, "Ah! Ah!" The dog stopped short, confused. Jake pointed to the ground. "Sit." Kaiser sat, his muscles trembling, his gaze locked on the ball. "Good," Jake said. He gave a simple, clean hand signal, a forward flick of his fingers. "Find." Kaiser snatched the ball, his tail a blur. He brought it back, dropping it at Jake's feet. "Good," Jake said again, his voice calm and approving. They did this for an hour. Sit, wait, find. Jake introduced new commands, not with words, but with gestures. A tap on his chest meant come. A flat, outstretched palm meant stay. He was retraining the dog, but he was also retraining himself. He was stripping away the harsh, loud world of military commands and creating a shared, silent language. There was no stick. There was no shouting. There was only the task and the reward. His new routine did not go unnoticed. He was a fixture now, the solitary limping seal and his canine shadow working tirelessly on the fringes of the base. One afternoon, Master Chief Petty Officer Grant, Jake's direct superior and mentor, spotted him. Grant was a plank owner, a founding member of the SEAL teams, a man whose leathery face was a roadmap of past conflicts. He was tough, fair, and the closest thing Jake had to a father figure in the military. Grant watched from his truck as Jake worked Kaiser, hiding the ball in increasingly complex places. Jake hid the ball under an overturned bucket. "Find," he commanded, using only the hand signal. Kaiser worked the problem. He sniffed the ground, his nose working fast. He circled the bucket, whined once, and then, instead of just barking, he gave the bottom of the bucket a sharp nudge with his nose. It was a clear, intelligent signal. "Yes, good boy," Jake said. He retrieved the ball, and in a moment of pure, unguarded joy, he wrestled with the dog, a rough chuckle escaping his lips. In the truck, Grant's stern expression softened. He hadn't heard Jake Riley laugh, not even a chuckle, in over a year. He put the truck in gear and drove away, a small, knowing smile on his face. Wraith was coming back. The real test came a week later. Jake decided it was time to move from a simple object to a person. He needed to know if Kaiser's intelligence was for play or for work. He chose the Kill House, a multi-story concrete structure used for close-quarters combat drills. It was a maze of small rooms, hallways, and stairwells, and it perpetually smelled of gunpowder, old sweat, and fear. It was the perfect complex environment. He set up the test carefully. First, he got some bacon from the mess hall, which he scattered near the main entrance, a high-value food distraction. Second, the main firing range was active 200 yards away, providing a constant crackle of gunfire, an auditory distraction that had set Kaiser off before. He led Kaiser to the entrance of the building. He let the dog scent the air, taking in the bacon and the gunfire. Kaiser's ears twitched at the sounds, but his eyes were on Jake for direction. Jake pulled off one of his utility gloves. He let Kaiser smell it deeply. "This is the job," he said. "Find." He gave the stay command, a firm, flat palm. Kaiser sat, trembling with anticipation, but he held his position. Jake entered the Kill House. He didn't just walk. He moved as if on a mission. He went down the main hall, up one flight of stairs, looped back through a series of dark rooms, went up another flight, and finally on the third floor, stepped into a small, windowless observation closet. He pulled the door shut, leaving it open just a crack, and sat in the darkness, waiting. 5 minutes later, he heard a single quiet command from Master Chief Grant, who had agreed to be his observer. "Find him." Jake heard the soft click of claws on the ground floor concrete. He heard Kaiser sniffing loudly, pausing, and then completely ignoring the bacon. A small victory. Then came the tracking. Kaiser was moving, not with frantic energy, but with the methodical, head-low intensity of a tracker. He followed Jake's path precisely. Jake heard him come up the first flight of stairs, heard his claws pause in the room where Jake had looped back, and then heard him confidently find the trail again. The gunfire outside erupted, a long, chattering burst of machine gun fire. Jake heard Kaiser pause for a single beat, then continue his work. He wasn't scared. He was focused. Another minute passed. It was silent, save for the distant gunfire. Then Jake heard the click, click, click on the third-floor landing. The sound stopped directly outside his closet door. Jake held his breath. A dog trained by Cole would have barked, scratched, signaled the attack. Kaiser did none of those things. A cold, wet nose pushed through the small crack in the door, sniffing. Jake heard a low, deep woof of air, then a soft, anxious whine. It wasn't a bark. It was a question. "Are you in there? I found you." Jake pushed the door open. Kaiser was sitting perfectly, his tail beating a frantic rhythm on the dusty floor. Jake knelt, his bad leg protesting, but he didn't care. He put his hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick. "Good find." Kaiser didn't jump. He didn't celebrate. He just leaned his entire body weight against Jake's chest and pushed his head under the man's chin, a silent, profound gesture of a purpose fulfilled. The tidal marshes of the Silver Strand, which separate the naval base from the Pacific, were another world from the orderly concrete blocks of the main base. It was a wet, primordial place, a tangle of cordgrass and brackish water that smelled of salt, mud, and decay. Mosquitoes hung in the humid air in clouds, and the ground was a treacherous soup ready to suck a boot clean off. It was the perfect place to train for the messy, unpredictable realities of combat. It was here that Commander Wallace had ordered a joint training exercise. Jake's SEAL team was present, tasked with a simulated over-the-water tracking and recovery. Jake, still on light duty, was relegated to an observation role. And to Master Sergeant Cole's visible disgust, the K-9 unit was ordered to participate, testing their own tracking abilities in the difficult terrain. Cole was in a foul mood. He hated the marshes and he hated taking orders that put him anywhere near Jake Riley and his pet project. Cole was in charge of the exercises package, the target the teams had to find. It wasn't a dummy. It was a live tactical beacon, a piece of equipment worth nearly $30, waterproofed and set to emit a faint, encrypted signal. Cole slogged through the sucking mud to the predesignated drop zone, a small, waterlogged island of cypress roots. He was slapping a mosquito on his neck when he dropped the beacon. It slipped from his gloved hand and landed with a soft, sickening plop in a pool of iridescent black water at the base of a root. He swore and plunged his hand into the cold, slimy water. He felt nothing. The mud was thick, a dark, silty quicksand. He fumbled for it, his fingers closing on nothing but slick, rotting wood. He pulled his hand out, coated in black ooze. The beacon was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through him. Losing a piece of sensitive gear like this wasn't just a mistake. It was a career-ending investigation. He looked around wildly. No one was watching. The SEALs were a quarter-mile downwater. The other K-9 handlers were prepping their dogs. Cole made a decision. He wiped the black mud from his hand onto his pants. He composed his face. He would say nothing. He would claim he placed the beacon, and if the SEALs couldn't find it, that was their failure. If it was never found, it was just lost in the field. An acceptable, if unfortunate, loss. He backed away from the spot, heart hammering, and returned to the command tent. An hour later, the exercise was called. The SEAL team had acquired no signal. Commander Wallace, his face grim, debriefed the team leader. "We swept the grid coordinates twice, sir. There's no signal. The beacon is either dead or it's not there." Wallace turned to Cole. "Master Sergeant, report." Cole wore a mask of professional concern. "I placed the beacon at the correct coordinates, sir. Tucked it into the base of a cypress root. It was active when I left it." A young ensign, a new face named Reed, who was in charge of the exercise inventory, looked up from his clipboard, his face pale. "Sir," the ensign said, his voice small. "That makes it a lost asset. We have to begin recovery protocols. That area is a tidal marsh." Wallace's eyes narrowed. "A $30 piece of equipment doesn't get lost. Ensign, we will find it." He ordered a full grid search of the island. For the next hour, sailors and SEALs slogged shoulder to shoulder through the marsh, probing the mud with long poles. They found nothing. Cole watched, a knot of fear tightening in his gut. This was escalating far beyond his control. Then he saw Jake Riley. Jake was standing at the edge of the chaos, his dog sitting calmly at his side. Kaiser wasn't pulling, wasn't barking, just watching the men work. And Cole, in his desperation, saw a way out. He saw a scapegoat. He strode over to Commander Wallace. "Sir, if I may," Cole said, his voice low and full of feigned reluctance. "What is it, Master Sergeant?" Wallace snapped, his patience worn thin. "I don't want to cause trouble, sir, but Riley's dog." Wallace turned his full attention to Cole. "What about him?" "I saw him, sir, maybe 30 minutes before the exercise began. He was running off-leash in that area." The lie came easily, smoothly. Riley was trying to call him back. "The dog was running wild, sir, just like he did on the training field. He's unpredictable. He's got a high prey drive." Cole let the implication hang in the air. An animal like that. It sees a new object, thinks it's a toy. He could have snatched it, sir, carried it off somewhere and buried it. He's still unstable. Every head turned. Jake and Kaiser were suddenly in a silent, accusatory spotlight. Jake's face remained expressionless, but he stood a little straighter, his hand unconsciously coming to rest on Kaiser's head. Wallace looked at Cole, his eyes cold and analytical. Then he looked at Jake. The logic was plausible. A rogue dog, a missing piece of gear. He was stuck. He had to follow the lead. "Riley," Wallace commanded, his voice carrying across the water. "You trained this dog for search and recovery. You told me he has a purpose." Jake met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Then prove it. This is no longer training. Find my beacon." This was it. Not a game with a glove in an empty building, but a real-world test in front of everyone with his and Kaiser's future on the line. Jake felt the pressure settle on his shoulders. He stepped forward, the mud sucking at his boots. "I need a scent article," he said. Ensign Reed quickly produced the empty, foam-lined Pelican case that had held the beacon. Jake took the case, opened it, and presented the empty cavity to Kaiser. "Here," he whispered, his voice for the dog alone. "This is the job. Find." Kaiser scented the foam lining deeply, his entire body humming with a new, intense focus. He huffed once, locking in the smell. Jake dropped the long lead, and Kaiser went to work. He didn't run wildly. He was a scalpel. His nose went low to the mud and he began to move, not in a grid, but in an intelligent, zigzagging pattern. He worked from the command tent toward the drop zone. He ignored the other men. He ignored the poles. He was a professional on a mission. Cole watched, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. This was perfect. The dog would fail, wander aimlessly, and Cole's story would be confirmed. Kaiser reached the waterlogged island. He circled it once, his nose high, tasting the air. Then he put his head down and began to track in earnest. He passed the area where the men were searching. He moved directly, confidently, toward the single cypress tree Cole had identified. He stopped. He was standing in the exact spot where Cole had dropped the beacon. Kaiser stood still, his nose pressed to the surface of the opaque, black water. He scented it once, twice. He looked up at Jake, who stood 20 feet away, holding the lead. Kaiser let out a sharp whine. It was the same signal from the closet. "It's here." "What is it, boy?" Jake said, moving closer. Kaiser didn't wait. He plunged his entire head and shoulders into the cold, black muck. He dug furiously, water and mud flying. "He's onto something," Ensign Reed shouted. Cole's face went from smug to ashen. "No, it's just a root. He's just digging." Kaiser backed out, his head and chest coated in black slime. And clamped gently in his jaws was the tactical beacon. He walked calmly, proudly, through the water, past the stunned sailors, and directly to Jake. He sat and with a gentle nudge of his nose, dropped the beacon at Jake's feet. A perfect retrieve. A total silence fell over the marsh. Every man from the ensign to the SEALs stared at the muddy beacon, then at the dog, then at Master Sergeant Cole. Commander Wallace's face was unreadable, but his eyes were chips of ice. He looked at the beacon, lying at Jake's feet. He looked at Cole, whose lie was now exposed, plastered on his horrified face. Wallace knew exactly what had happened. The dog hadn't buried it. The dog had found it precisely where Cole had lost it and lied to cover his incompetence. Wallace bent down and picked up the beacon. He turned to Jake. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say, "Good job." He just gave Jake a single, decisive nod. It was all that was needed. Then he turned his cold gaze back to Master Sergeant Cole. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "My office, 0600 tomorrow. You are relieved of your duties." News on a military base travels faster than a signal flare. By 0800 the next morning, the entire K-9 unit knew that Master Sergeant Cole was on administrative leave, his office sealed, awaiting an immediate transfer. The official reason was negligence in the handling of sensitive military assets and providing a false statement during an after-action debrief. The unofficial reason, the one that spread through the mess halls and briefing rooms, was simpler. He lied, and a dog he called a failure exposed him. The atmosphere around Jake and Kaiser changed overnight. When Jake took Kaiser for his morning walk, sailors who once shied away from the big dog with nervous looks now watched him with a mixture of awe and respect. The dog was no longer Wraith's psycho shepherd. He was the dog that found the beacon. The most profound shift, however, Jake felt when he walked into his team's briefing room later that morning. It was the first time he'd brought Kaiser into the Holy of Holies. The team room was the SEALs clubhouse, a place that smelled of old coffee, damp neoprene, and gun oil. The walls were covered in deployment maps, inside jokes, and photos of fallen teammates. A few team members were present, stripping down gear after a morning exercise. Hank, the team's heavyset breacher, a giant of a man who was usually the loudest person in any room, looked up. He saw Jake, then his eyes dropped to Kaiser, who stood calmly at Jake's side. "Well, I'll be damned," Tank said, his voice rumbling with respect. He pointed at the dog. "He really did it. I was out there. Spectre saw the whole thing. That guy Cole. He was sweating bullets. Your boy here. He walks right up, sticks his head in the mud, and pulls it out. Perfect retrieve. Never seen anything like it." Kaiser, sensing the friendly tone, thumped his tail once. From the corner, Master Chief Grant looked up from his coffee mug. Grant, Jake's mentor and the team's senior enlisted man, had watched Jake's isolation for months with a quiet, worried patience. He stood, his leathery face unreadable, and walked over. He didn't look at Jake. He looked at the dog. Grant was an old-school operator. He saw tools, assets, and threats. He studied Kaiser for a long, serious moment, taking in the dog's clear eyes, his calm posture, his obvious focus on Jake. Kaiser looked back, unafraid, unaggressive. Grant's stern expression finally broke into a small, approving nod. He looked up at Jake. "That's a good dog, Wraith." He clapped a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. "Good to have you back." The words hit Jake harder than the praise for the dog. He realized his mentor wasn't just talking about his leg. He was talking about him. The isolation, the wall of shadows he had built around himself, was finally breached. He nodded, his throat tight. "Good to be back, Master Chief." Later that day, Jake was walking Kaiser past the K-9 kennels. A dark blue transport truck was parked outside, its engine idling. Master Sergeant Cole, stripped of his K-9 handler insignia, walked out of the barracks carrying a heavy duffel bag. He looked haggard, his usual ruddy complexion replaced by a pale, pinched bitterness. He saw Jake and stopped. Jake stopped too. He put a hand on Kaiser's shoulder, a silent stay. Kaiser, sensing the tension, didn't growl. He simply stood, a solid, protective presence, his gaze locked on the man who had tried to end him. "Riley," Cole spat, his voice low and venomous. Jake just waited, his face neutral. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you won." Cole threw his bag into the back of the truck with a thud. "You took a dominant, high-drive animal, one that could have been a real weapon, and you broke him." He stepped closer, ignoring the truck driver who was trying to hurry him along. "I would have broken him down. I would have made him tough. I would have made him a tool that could save lives. And you? You broke him a different way." He gestured with a disgusted wave of his hand. "You turned him into a soft pet." Jake listened to the words, felt their intended sting, but they had no effect. He looked at Cole, a man who could only see the world in terms of dominance and submission. Then he looked down at Kaiser, at the intelligent, loyal animal at his side. "You're wrong, Cole," Jake said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the rumble of the truck's engine. "You wanted a weapon, so you treated him like a tool. And he broke. I just treated him like a professional, and he became a partner." Jake took one step forward, his gaze unwavering. "That's the difference, and that's what you'll never understand." Cole's face twisted, but he had no comeback. He was beaten. With one last look of hatred, he climbed into the truck. It rolled away, its diesel fumes fouling the air. And then he was gone. An hour later, Jake's phone buzzed, a text from the base commander's aide. "Report to Commander Wallace's office. 1500. Jake's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected the public confrontation with Cole. He worried this was a reprimand. He left Kaiser in his room and walked to the command building. At ease, Riley, have a seat. Commander Wallace was all business, his desk immaculate. Jake sat. Master Sergeant Cole has been permanently reassigned to a depot in Guam, pending a full investigation into his conduct, Wallace said, shuffling a stack of papers. That matter is resolved. He paused, then slid a single folder across the polished desk. This one, however, is not. Jake opened the folder, his eyes widening. He read the title on the cover page, Tactical Support K-9 Certification. Underneath, K-9 Asset, Kaiser. Handler, S. O'Reilly. Sir? Jake looked up, stunned. After the incident in the marsh, Wallace said, steepling his fingers. I had Master Chief Grant submit his full after-action report, which included his evaluation of your training. He seems to think, and I concur, that this dog is more than just a project. Wallace leaned forward. You took an asset that every expert on this base deemed a failure and a liability, and you gave him a purpose. You saw value. That's what I expect from my operators. This certification makes him an official attachment to your team. Wallace stood, a signal that the meeting was over. Don't thank me. You both earned it. Your light duty status is revoked. You're both back on the active roster. Get that dog a proper harness. Dismissed. Jake stood, the folder feeling heavy in his hands. He was back. They were back. Yes, sir. The weeks after the certification were the best Jake had known since before his injury. His leg, strengthened by the long walks and training sessions, had stopped aching. The limp was almost gone. But the more profound change was internal. Wraith had color in his cheeks, a life in his eyes that had been absent for a year. He was no longer a ghost haunting the base. He was a handler. Kaiser was his shadow. He had his own official tactical harness, which he wore with an almost comical pride. He attended team briefings, lying quietly at Jake's feet in the team room. He was no longer just Jake's dog. He was the team's K-9. Hank, the breacher, had taken to saving half his breakfast sandwich for him, and even the serious Ensign Reed was caught playing fetch with him behind the barracks. They were a unit. Jake and Kaiser moved with a shared, silent language, a bond forged in nightmares and solidified by trust. The peace shattered on a Tuesday. The high, piercing wail of the alert siren, not a drill, but the real thing, tore through the 1,400-hour quiet. Jake and Kaiser were in the team room. Jake was cleaning his rifle, Kaiser dozing at his feet. In 1 second, they were both on their feet. The dog didn't bark. He just rose, instantly alert, watching Jake. Let's go, Jake said. The room exploded with motion. The team poured in, grabbing gear, their faces instantly hardening into mission focus. Master Chief Grant was at the front, pulling down a tactical map. Listen up. Grant's voice cut through the noise. We have a hostage situation. A diplomatic convoy was ambushed in North Africa. We have 2 friendlies, an ambassador and his aide, barricaded in a consulate outbuilding. Hostiles are Sieg, heavily armed, and they're digging in for a siege. We are the rescue package. Air Force is spooling up a C-17 at Nas North Island. Wheels up in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. An impossible, terrifyingly fast timeline. Jake was already moving to his locker, his mind a steel trap of checklists. Rifle, body armor, magazines, night vision, water. He reached for the shelf where he kept Kaiser's gear, the harness, a collapsible water bowl, a first aid kit. Wraith, hold up. Jake turned. Master Chief Grant was there, his face tight and apologetic. Beside him was a man Jake didn't know well. Petty Officer Finch, a thin, perpetually stressed man who ran base logistics and transport. Finch was holding a clipboard, the digital tablet that contained the team's fate. What is it, Master Chief? Jake asked, his hand still on the harness. Finch looked at his tablet, then at Grant, then at Jake. He wouldn't meet Jake's eyes. I can't put the dog on the bird, Riley. The words were so small, so bureaucratic, that they didn't immediately register. What? I can't clear him on the manifest, Finch repeated, his voice reedy. His certification was signed by Commander Wallace. Yes, but that was an internal, base-level cert. It hasn't cleared the central DoD database. It takes weeks for the system to update. As far as Air Mobility Command is concerned, this dog does not officially exist in a deployable status. It's a non-starter. A cold, sick feeling washed over Jake. It's just paperwork. The commander signed it. He's on the team. It's not just paperwork, Finch insisted, looking miserable. It's the system. I can't add an unverified asset to an active deployment manifest. If anything happened, the liability. I can't. Jake looked at Grant, a desperate appeal in his eyes. Grant shook his head, his jaw tight. He's right, Jake. It's the bureaucracy. It's the one thing we can't fight. My hands are tied. You go. The dog stays. For a second, Jake didn't move. He felt the old, cold detachment creeping back in. He was being asked to cut off a part of himself. The team was waiting. He was a SEAL. He had a job. He closed his eyes, then opened them. The warmth was gone. Wraith was back. Understood, he said, his voice flat. He turned his back on Kaiser's gear. He finished packing his own bag in a silence that was deeper than any noise in the room. Hank looked over, his face pained. Spectre, that's rough. Jake just nodded, zipped his bag, and slung it over his shoulder. Kaiser, sensing the shift, sensing the harness being left behind, whined a low, confused note. He pushed his nose into Jake's hand. Jake looked down at him. Stay, he commanded. His voice was empty. He had one last task. He grabbed Kaiser's simple nylon leash. He had to take him to the base kennels, the very place he had rescued him from. The walk was a torment. Kaiser trotted at his side, confused, his head high, clearly believing this was the first step of the mission. But as they turned away from the transport trucks and toward the kennels, the dog's pace slowed. He knew this place. A kennel tech, a young sailor, met them at the door, his face full of pity. Master Chief called, "Sir. We've got a temporary hold for him." Jake led Kaiser down the echoing concrete corridor of barking dogs. He opened the chain-link gate. Kaiser backed up, bracing his paws. He looked up at Jake, his eyes a universe of confusion and betrayal. "You're not leaving me here. Not again." "Go," Jake said. He had to physically push the dog into the kennel. The moment he did, Kaiser spun around, his front paws on the chain link. He didn't bark. He just whined, a high, heartbroken sound. Jake latched the gate. He didn't look back. He was a professional. He was a Navy SEAL. He walked out of the kennel. The sound of that repeated whine followed him, a dagger in his back. 40 minutes later, the team was on the tarmac at Nas North Island. The C-17 Globemaster was a monster, a mountain of gray metal. Its massive ramp was down, its engines screaming a high, deafening song. The air smelled of jet fuel. The team, laden with gear, moved in a single, silent file toward the dark, cavernous cargo bay. Jake was the last in line. He was numb. He was a component, a piece of equipment ready to be shipped. He put his boot on the ramp and began the long walk into the darkness. "Riley!" The shout was almost inaudible over the engines. Jake stopped, his back to the sound. He didn't want to turn around. "Wraith, hold up." This time he recognized the voice. It was Grant. Jake turned. A single base jeep was careening across the tarmac, its lights flashing, weaving around ground crews. It screeched to a halt 20 yards from the ramp. Master Chief Grant leapt out of the driver's seat. From the passenger seat, a black shape exploded, already wearing a full tactical harness. "Kaiser!" Grant was running. A folder was clutched in his hand. His face was split in a rare, wide grin. "Riley, catch!" he roared, throwing the folder. Jake caught it out of the air. He fumbled, his numb fingers clumsy, and opened it. It was a single sheet of paper, still warm from the printer. A new manifest, and at the bottom, a single line, K9 Asset, Kaiser. Tactical support. Override, McGuire, AFTC. Grant ran up, clapping him on the shoulder, shouting over the noise. The commander. He was on the phone for an hour. He went over everyone's head, got a 2-star general at Air Mobility Command. He said, "No partner gets left behind. Now get on the plane." The numbness in Jake's chest shattered. It broke apart. He looked at Kaiser, who was dancing next to Grant, barking, frantic to get to him. The stone-cold mask of Wraith broke. A real, sudden, unguarded smile lit up his features. He didn't shout. He didn't cheer. He just slapped his thigh. A single sharp movement. "Kaiser, here." It was the only command needed. Kaiser launched past Grant, a black blur of muscle and joy, and up the ramp. The rest of the team, watching from inside, broke into a cheer, stomping their feet on the metal floor. Jake gave Grant one last, grateful nod. Grant saluted. Jake turned and followed his dog into the plane. The huge ramp whined as it began to close, sealing them in the red combat light of the cargo hold. Jake dropped his bag and sat on the floor, leaning his back against a bulkhead. The C-17 began to roll, the vibration traveling through his bones. A moment later, a solid, 80-pound weight settled beside him. Kaiser pushed his head firmly into Jake's lap, let out a happy sigh, and looked up at him. He was ready. Jake put his hand on the dog's head, his fingers gripping the familiar, warm fur. They were together. They had a purpose.